This whole movie's terrible.
Welcome to another episode of the Wave Motion Canon anime podcast that is weekly. I will get this title right eventually. I am your host, CJ Hitchcock, and this week I am joined by the Subtle Doctor. Hello, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
So, Netflix came out with this live-action Death Note movie that isn't very good. I think that's just the way that we're just going to jump into this and just kind of, lay our biases right there on the floor. Like, I really did not like this thing, and I'm sure you can tell from the heavy sighs that Subs isn't a fan either.
That is accurate. I think the degree to which I'm not a fan may be surprising to people that listen to this show regularly or my other shows. Like, I tend to be... I might be the critic who just likes stuff the most, and is always, like, positive and or overly gushy about things. I mean, my anime of the year is an anime from last year. Is a show that you all hated. So, like, I like Ray Zero, right, a lot, and even me, right, who, like, put Taboo Tattoo on our anime of the year list, who loves garbage things and things he knows are bad. Like, I really, really, really hated this movie.
Yeah, and so... Also, something else I want to throw in there, we're going neck deep into spoiler territory with this, because this, like, especially when you get to the third act of this movie, it gets so unbelievably stupid and just weird that you can't have a discussion about this movie without bringing it up. At least that was kind of my viewpoints on this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, we absolutely have to spoil things, and that's okay, because you should listen to us talk about it so that you don't have to watch it, I think.
Yeah, the thing that I want the most out of this episode above everything else is that I want this to serve as a warning as to not watch this movie even out of a mild curiosity.
That's a public service announcement.
Yes, I'm doing my civic duty by telling you guys about this movie and just where this movie just stumbles and falls. Although, with that being said, as much as I do not like this movie, and how bad this movie is overall, there are two things that I like about this movie. One, I will save for a bit later. Okay. But the big thing I think we should get out of the way first is that William Dafoe is awesome in this movie. He plays the perfect character as Ryuk. His performance is amazing, and I don't think he's been fit for a better role. Like, William Dafoe knocked this out of the park. He did the best that he absolutely could with this material, and actually does have some moments in it that are generally creepy when it comes to his performance. Unfortunately, he's barely in the movie.
I didn't even like Willem Dafoe that much in this movie. Like, I thought like, I could just picture him in a tiny recording studio, sweating, looking bored, doing sing-song reads. Like, just something about the delivery seemed off to me. Like, I don't know, but, like, I am willing to, like, concede that I just may have been soured on something good by the rest of the absolute... I mean, I couldn't taste the delicious morsel in the shit sandwich.
Yes, and like for me, like I am a big William Dafoe fan. Like one of the best movies I think he's ever been in is Streets of Fire, which is a movie I will gush on about for hours. And a big part of that is William Dafoe's depiction as the villain of that movie. It's one of those things where it just like he just has such a great personality and this great gravelly voice, and like it definitely seems like he is perfect to play a death god. And then in the brief scenes where he's in a Death Note, it's basically just him kind of being like, you should totally kill those people, you know?
That was pretty good. I enjoyed that, actually. I enjoyed that, Ryuk.
But yeah, and so, like, I'll get to another thing that I'll talk about much later when we get towards the 2/3 act of this movie. But yeah, to get back to Death Note.
It's a neat game.
This is one of those movies where it seems like the people who were making it, the people who were writing it, the people who were directing it, only
film students.
Well, no,
that's the way it really felt to me. It felt like a fucking first student film of people that were super fans of like Veronica Mars and CW shit. It felt like a CWized, bastardized Death Note adaptation. Like, I mean, the only reason that it felt is slightly higher than that in quality is the actual equipment they use for the production. They have better cameras than the CW has, basically.
Yeah, I'm willing to agree with that, but a little bit. But like for me, like it seems like the people who were behind this movie either didn't really understand what was the good thing about Death Note, or only read like a brief synopsis of what it was about, and it's like, okay, here are a couple of characters from the thing, let's make a movie. Like, it's one of those things where it's just like this, like everything about this Netflix film is so not what the source material is. And
what are your feelings about the source material?
I like the source material quite a bit. I am a fan of Death Note. The manga is the best, the anime is good, and this film is awful. And when it comes to the Japanese films, which we'll talk about a bit later towards the end of the show, because that's our Patreon question. But
spoilers.
Yeah. But yeah, like even with the Japanese films, they're okay. Again, I'll talk about them later. But you know, it's just it is one of those series where one, especially with the manga, the artwork is absolutely gorgeous throughout all 12 volumes of that thing, and it really is this great, just kind of fun characters kind of being locked in this room and just kind of bickering with each other. Like that's kind of like the short end of it. It's basically just personalities clashing. You have these battles of the minds, and yeah, they can be kind of convoluted and kind of full of themselves, but it gets pretty fun, and just one of those kind of a cat and mouse kind of storyline where they're trying to best each other the entire time, and it's a fun series. And the big key thing was that it was always a battle of the minds. And this movie is probably one of the most brain dead things I've seen in a really long time.
It is. And okay, so this is interesting. This is a good, I think we make a good balance of perspective. So you have seen and read everything that there is to see and read of the franchise, and you're a big fan. I've only seen the anime. I've not seen the live action films or read the manga. And while I liked the anime quite a bit and I thought it was entertaining and competent and smart, like I didn't love it, and I thought it had a few problems, especially towards in the last third. So like I'm not so we've both seen some of it, so we both know what the source material kind of is, but like whereas you come to this with quite a bit of reverence for it, I am like, well, it's a thing that I like, but like I don't think that nostalgia or love for the original is sort of clouding my vision here. Like, this is not if only this were exactly like the manga review. I know yours is not either, but actually I am quite confident in your ability to objectively judge this, but just for the audience, right, who might be more dubious, like, I'm not a Death Note super fan. I don't like mind the kind of like if they fuck around with the material making an adaptation. It's just bad. It's just very poorly done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to kind of like speak on just adaptations in general, I have long since stopped looking for pinpoint accuracy in these kind of movies when they're based off of a source material that I've been reading for a long time or whatnot. Like for me, it's always about capturing the spirit of something. Mm-hmm. And because like with this, you know, because like I could go on forever about the numerous amounts of characters that are not in this movie that are in the series that have like major importance. And one thing I'll talk about in particular that seems really weird is like what they do with the rules. It is really bizarre because they do major changes with that. But you know, that's not influencing how much I don't like this movie. Like, it might be a small part of it, but at the end of the day, this is just a bad movie. Like, this is...
Straight up.
Like, this is... Because, like, this is a movie where you have these characters who are trying to sound like they're smarter than everybody else in the room, and yet they're making the stupidest goddamn decisions that you could possibly ever think of. And it's one of those things, like, you just watch it, and you're just... like, good lord, like, why would you do that? You know, like, that is a majority of this movie. You're just watching in disbelief, just like, why?
Why would you do that?
Right.
And why can't you act better, people who are trying to convince me that you're smart or scared or any of the range of human emotions that you're trying to sell me on? Sell it better.
Because, like, you know, when it comes to Light Turner, we'll talk about the name changes.
What a fucking Light Turner.
Yeah.
I mean,
Light,
that just... it's hilarious.
Light
it's kind of hilarious.
Turner. Like, actually, and it was one of those things until you actually said it, I'm like, oh, God. Like, it hit me, just the Turner part. I'm like, oh, he's actually turning the... Oh, God. Ugh. But yeah, it's just like that's kind of the thing. Like, they wanted to westernize this, and I'm not completely against doing that. Again, as long as the spirit of the thing is there, you know, that's kind of the big thing for me. But with this, it's one of those things where it's just like, you have, like, Misa, who is in the story, and yet they call her Maya in this thing, and it's just like, why? Like, I know that she's, you know, just a white girl. She's not an Asian lady, but still, Misa isn't really that weird of a name. And on top of that, the way that you have Mia spelt out, where it's like M-I-I-A, I've never, ever seen anyone spell their name that way.
Yeah, I didn't actually see it spelled that way. That's funny.
Yeah.
I didn't notice, is what I mean.
Well, you know, because, like, there's a part where the name is written at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it was one of those things. Like, that was... Because, like, and that's kind of the thing with this movie is that, you know, like, there's so many stupid things going on that you just look at small pinpoint details and then they just hit you like a sideline because everything else is just... stupid, and then the small details are even stupider.
Stupid or also boring.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of this movie, especially the middle, is just really boring. I mean, like, the fucking long scenes of, like, them having sex and watching the news and writing names in their notebook, like, to the incredible music of Air Supply. Like, it's just, that's so boring. And, like, in the final act, they have this, like, really, really long, like, I mean, they could have cut so much. Like, this chase scene that was just, like, people running, more people running.
My favorite.
It's another shot of people running.
my...
Like, and it's just shot, like, dumb. Like, I mean...
The funniest
thing
about that...
It lasted forever.
The funniest thing about that chase scene, though, is like, because, like, ultimately it comes down to, like, the big climax of the movie outside of the Ferris wheel scene is you have Elle realizing that Light is Kira. And so, as Elle would do, he grabs a gun that looks like it's a laser rifle from this suitcase.
It was like, where did you get that off the Blade Runner set? It looks like a thermonuclear handgun that has, like, if you fired it, it would start smoking because it only has this one bullet. Like, what a fucking ridiculous god.
And so, like, you have Elle, like, chasing like across the city for like 10 minutes, and like, you know, like, they're running in between buildings, and they're running in between, like, into restaurants, and, like, there's this one moment...
Shoving people over, like,
shoving people over
4
for no
times.
reason. And, like, the funniest thing for me was the moment, well, for no reason whatsoever, Elle just jumps on top of this counter and starts running across, and it's just like, dude, he's not even in the building anymore. Come on, dude. Like, why are you doing that? Like, there was a clear pathway you could have taken. Like...
Did you see whenever Elle jumped over the hood of the car? Like,
yes.
It looked like the shittiest thing ever. Like, it was the worst, possibly the worst stunt shot on film ever. And you're just thinking, I mean, surely they could have done another take of that. I mean, unless it's like during that shot, Elle fell and like broke his knee. And they were like, nope, it's a wrap. One take is we got it.
You know, the scariest thing that you can always say in the editing community is like, that was the best take. You know, like,
I know.
Like,
it looked terrible. Oh my god.
Man. But yeah, and also, like, I know we're jumping around with this thing, but like that climax for that chase scene, stupid. Like, it just, because like you have this point where Elle finally catches up to Light, and Light's just babbling on like, I don't want to have it anymore. And which is basically the entire summation of his character throughout this movie. Just, I don't want to have it anymore. and Elle's like getting ready to like, why'd you kill Watery? And is getting ready to kill him with this gun, and is like, they're like, I'm arresting Kira, and this guy just kind of walks out from this kitchen, and Elle turns around and just like, this is Kira, you know, I'm arresting him, I'm doing this for justice. And then, for like no reason, the guy who just randomly walks into the scene just beats him over the head with like a 2x4 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Just, where did you get that? And then all of a sudden,
was it a 2x4? I don't know what it was. I was like, I mean, it might as well have been a frying pan, right?
Yeah, like it just hits him over the head with it, knocks him unconscious, and Light goes and turns to him and just like, what? And all he says, like, something along the lines of just like, hail Kira or something like that.
He's one of the believers.
And that's it. Like, that's the entirety of that scene. And just like, there's no, like, there's like 1 or 2 shots during the opening montage of like after Kira starts doing the big kills and stuff like that, where you see some followers, but they never show up throughout the rest of the movie until this one moment. And like, it doesn't seem like, oh, this is the outreach that Kira has. It just seems like, oh, the writers wrote themselves into a corner, and they're afraid of killing either one of these 2 characters right now. So,
well, the whole movie the movie has a real problem with its pace. Like, it's in a real big hurry to, even though, again, like I said, it has all these bloated parts, it's still, when it's not doing stupid montages or chase scenes, like, it's in a real hurry to get to the next thing, and it doesn't like properly seed things that are going to come later. Like, there's no build up. Like, they don't build up to any of the moments that they want to pay off later, and so the payoff moments sort of range from like, what, to like, I don't care, to like, oh my god, that was hilarious. And that's not the intended effect. Like, I think there are people on Twitter that I've read that enjoy this movie, and I think that they enjoy it because they feel like it's trying and supposed to be this like campy, like, so bad it's good thing, and I don't think that that's what it's going for. I really don't.
No, it's not. It's trying to be as serious as it can be. What seems really weird about everything else, like, especially with the bloated and fast pace that this movie has, like, it's not even trying to follow the same storyline
No.
that's in the original. And that's the thing that makes it really weird for me, because it's just like, look, if you're not even going to bother trying to do the original storyline, why are you... Just do your own thing, you know? Like, just do what you want to do, go at your own pace. Like, why are you trying to rush any of this? Because, like, if you're doing... Because, like, a lot of the problems that a lot of live-action Japanese movies have of anime series is that they try to cover the entirety of the series. Like, Devilman in particular has this major problem where it's trying to cover 5 volumes of a manga in a 2-hour movie. And, it doesn't work. The pacing is just all over the place. And... like, if this movie was trying to do a similar thing, where it's trying to be like, okay, we're going to cover volumes 1 through 6, you know, but they're not even doing that. Like, they don't have that excuse, you know, like, they're not, like, trying to be pressed for time. They're just, they're just incompetent in terms of their writing and how they want to set things up. And it's kind of baffling when you're watching it, and just like, why, like, just slow down a little bit, establish some things, and then tell your story. And, you know, to be fair, like, Death Note does have that issue in both the manga and the anime, where it really does love its exposition. Like, it really, really does. You know, like, there's the big rule of show, don't tell. Death Note does not care. It's going to tell you everything and everything. And, and that's part of the reason why I kind of find it charming, especially when you're reading it as a manga, because at that point, you know, it makes a little bit more sense. But it's...
At least the exposition is interesting.
Yes, and that's kind of the other thing, is that in the source material, it has these rules established, and you're kind of discovering things along with the same pace as Light is. And you're kind of watching Light grow from being kind of this innocent who is given this terrible power to being a maniac who sees himself as a god. You know, that's kind of like his character progression throughout the series. And I think, like, the big evidence with that is a big comparison between what's different between the series, the anime series, and what is different in this live action movie is the rules in the Notebook. Because in the original source material, there's only 3 that Ryuk has written in the book. And... Right.
Man.
And all the other rules that come up in the series, because, like, that's kind of the eye catches in between commercial breaks in the TV series, is, like, a bunch of different rules, and that's also, like, they also appear in the manga. And what they're supposed to be is that's Light adding additional things to the Death Note rules as he's learning about these powers. So again, like, as you're going across, like, the rules get more and more complicated. And it's, you know, again, like, you're seeing a progression, you know, they're getting darker and more, you know, heinous and whatnot. Yes. And again, like, it's a sense of progression that's going on throughout the entirety of the series. While in this one, it's just, here's all 94 rules that Ryuk has written down in this book. And that's kind of the other thing, is that in the series, Ryuk is supposed to be kind of a goofball death god.
Yeah,
like, he's supposed to be very incompetent. And with this one, he's just kind of... It's like he's all-knowing, but yet very oblivious. And it's a very weird combination.
Yeah, I think this is probably the spot where I really kind of do take issue with the adaptation. Not for being an adaptation necessarily, but, like, I don't know. I just don't like the way that... So he was in the original, you know, a watcher, and he was just there because he was bored and he wanted to see the humans fuck up and, you know, entertain him. And he's much more of an actor in the story in this. Like, he actively wants Light to fail and he wants to kill him, and it feels like he's conspiring against him in a way that I don't remember it feeling in the show. In the show, it felt like, you know, he was laughing at him, but he's very much still on the sidelines.
Right, and not only that, but in the movie, Ryuk is trying to actively encourage Light to get rid of this book, which is also very odd, because, like, you would think that Light is supposed to be like this dude who has this mission and this goal that he wants to achieve. Like, he wants to achieve world peace by killing all the bad people. Like, that's ultimately his goal. And they talk about that a little bit at the beginning of this movie, but then when shit starts going wrong, he's just like, I don't want to do it anymore. And is actively trying to get rid of it. Like, the moment where it's just like things start not going his way, he's just like, I'm done with it. And it seems like a majority of this movie is just him trying to get rid of the responsibility of having this book as opposed to trying to achieve his own goals. Like that, like, and like that's the thing that's really weird about this movie, is that there really doesn't feel like there's a build-up between a battle between L and Light, because L seems like, you know, again, like L is just kind of L in this movie where he just wants to stop the bad guy, while Light is just actively trying to place the burden on someone else, and then when he does have an opportunity to get rid of it, he doesn't for some reason. And it's very odd, because it's just like, what exactly do you want this character to do? You know, because again, like, it just doesn't seem like he has a very clear goal in this movie, or the clear goal that he's given does not, like, follow the actions that he's doing in the movie. And I think that's really frustrating when you're watching it just as a viewer, because it's just like there's no clear motivation for anything that he's doing in this movie. And it also, like, there's no point in this movie where Light feels like he's intelligent at all. Like,
you're right about that.
Yeah, like, he is just this punk little emo kid who is doing high school level homework for profit, and
because he's a genius. He can do pre-cal.
Yeah, it's just, like, there's no real big feat of intelligence that he has in this movie. At all. Like, it's just...
And him being obviously smarter than Mia is not saying a lot. Because they try to, I think, sort of show, like, oh, Light's the smart one. He's not willing to just believe random people on a forum. But Mia is. And it's just like, well, I mean, that doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't really paint him as a super genius. And he's making a million other dumb decisions. It's just that Mia, it just comes off feeling like just even dumber and just not likable or interesting in any way as a character.
Right, and that's kind of the thing with this, in the original series, is that you have Light, who is this ultimately really charming, intelligent young man who it seems like he wants to do the right thing and is doing it by doing horrible things. And then you have Misa, who is, you know, this obsessive superfan who... and that's kind of charming in its own way because of just how much devotion that she has, to the point where it's kind of terrifying to watch and follow. And you have, like, this really interesting mix between these two characters, and the way that they progress in that story is that, you know, it kind of starts out as like, oh, I guess she loves me, that's kind of cool, to, like, how can I actively use her in my plots, you know?
Yeah. So the way that I read some of the things that you are taking issue with, like, so one of the real interesting, well, a couple of the real interesting things I thought about the Death Note anime were, you know, that Light, he doesn't run away from the situation, whenever he's faced with sort of the moral ambiguity and the choice to, like, really, like, he has obviously crossed the line from what, like, you and I would think is immoral, but, like, when he really begins to transgress that line, like, he just goes fully into it. And the show is still, I think, really good, even though that you don't agree with him, of making you interested in him, making you like him, and you're struggling not to root for him, even though he is before your eyes becoming a horrible villain. And in this show, in this film, I I mean, that's just not the case. That dimension is not there, and it kind of seems like integral to Death Note, to having this power is having someone go there, and when you don't, I don't know, it's just what they did end up doing just wasn't as interesting to me. I mean, I know that this is the one thing they did seed a little bit is the most minor way, like so in the beginning of the film, you have Light talking to his father about the death of his mother and the way the world is in general, and he's frustrated that the system seems to be working against the people it's trying to protect. He's like, Dad, like, you don't go out there and just get things done and solve problems. Like, you're just like held back by red tape and these like beliefs that you need to stay within the lines and stay within the system, and there are people out there that need help, and you just need to help them. You just need to make this decision. And so you have that mindset carried into the Death Note situation, where Light thinks, this is it. This is my chance to just help people and subvert the system, and yet that situation sort of starts to chew him up and consume him, and it becomes another system that is blocking him from helping people because of all these different variables and factors, and he crumbles and wants to run away from it, and it wants to paint him as a sympathetic character, as like, here is Light once again, getting beaten by the system, and he's just another victim in all this, and like, it just fell totally flat to me. I felt no sympathy for him. I mean, I didn't care about him to begin with.
Yeah, and that is kind of a really big issue with this movie, and I think a big part of it is who he's choosing as his victims, because in the anime in particular, like, he's going for people who are completely unconnected to him, and just people that he thinks are just bad people, and and that kind of helps him grow that sense of, like, I am doing good in the world by getting rid of these people. While, especially with the first two people that he kills in this movie, it's the bully that, that kicked his ass at the beginning of the film. Like, he's the first person to go. And then the next person is the person who killed his mom. And it, like, each time during this thing, it doesn't really seem like he's serving justice. It seems like he's just seeking revenge for things that happened to him personally. And because of that, you don't get that sense of this is a grand operation that he is trying to put upon the world. And that idea becomes kind of like jammed into the movie for a moment, and then it's just like completely forgotten after a while. And it's just, again, like, it's just a mishmash of, between the aim of what you're trying to go for when you're when you're trying to convey an idea in this movie and what you actually show on screen. And it comes across as very amateurish.
It does. I wish, like you, I feel like, it would have been nice, in my opinion, for them to depart even more from the source material with the Death Note concept. Like, don't feel the need to shoehorn the characters or setting into it, because I think, like, in a modern context of, like, drone warfare and what have you, you could tell an interesting and relevant story of someone who has tremendous power to, like, take lives and, like, do things that alter people's worlds remotely from a distance, feeling nothing. Like, they're so removed from the situation that they feel none of the kind of consequences that you traditionally do when you take a life, and what does that do to a person? Like, you can kind of explore that, and that's really interesting, but of course none of that happens here. This is the story about, an angsty teenager that wants to, he's troubled and he wants to fight the system, and he wants to get back the people that hurt him, and he wants to have sex with the lady he's interested in, and that's kind of it.
Well, And for me, it seems like he's more interested in self-preservation than he is anything else that he any of the other goals that's out there in this movie. It just, because everything that he does in this movie is just kind of self-centered. It's about self-preservation, especially when you get towards the ending. Because, like, the one big elaborate scheme that is in this movie is all set up so that Light lives at the end of it.
Man, that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Like, I watched this movie with my wife, and I don't know why. I did not ask her or force her to. I was like, I have to watch this movie for this podcast. You may do whatever you want, obviously. I said, no, it's going to be bad. You don't have to watch it. And she's like, no, I'm kind of interested. And she hated it just as much as we did. But the scene in which the page of the book that had
flutters down,
that had his name on it, flutters down from on high the Ferris wheel and lands into a burning garbage can. The page that said Light Turner's heart stops beating at midnight. It burns so that he lived. Like, and Elle's walking up to the garbage can, seeing it happen. Like, just seeing it, like, we were, like, crying, laughing. Like, I was rolling around on the carpet, hitting the floor. I was scared I was going to wake up my children. I just could not contain the laughter at that. That was unbelievably stupid. Like, intergalactically stupid.
And it was one of those things, because, like, the moment that it happens, it's just like, no, they're seriously not. And it just magically flutters into this random because, like, you look at it and just like, why is this trash can on fire?
It's a symbolism for the film. The film is a trash fire.
But okay, so for me, the biggest laugh that this movie got from me, well, there were like two really big laughs that this movie got from me. The first one was the scene where they introduced Ryuk, where because, like, for whatever reason, like, Light has detention for doing people's homework. And this is... Apparently he is the only person in this entirety of the school who has gotten detention this day.
Yeah.
Fine,
yeah,
whatever.
Sure.
But so he's alone in this room, and Ryuk decides to make a big dramatic entrance by smashing a jar. Marbles go flying everywhere. Like, I don't know why this classroom has a jar of marbles, but whatever. And, like, and of course, like, shit starts going crazy, and, like, paper and confetti starts flying everywhere. Chairs and everything else just start flying against the walls. And, they have their whole entire decapitation scene, which is just needlessly gory, which is kind of all I really think I need to say about that. It's needlessly gory. Yeah. But
some Final Destination bullshit.
And then, of course, like, you have that scene where just Light is just yelling. Well, I don't even know if that's yelling, more like just... like, wounded dog surprised at things.
I had to rewind it and watch it again. It was so stupid. Oh my god. So bad.
There's a scene where he screams and he's like, rah! And, like, hides underneath the teacher's desk, and the teacher just goes flying backwards, and he's just curled in the fetal position. And, like, Ryuk's just like, think about the notebook, and leaves, and then, like, he's just sitting in the middle of this classroom that's just destroyed. Chairs and everything are just gone. Confetti is everywhere. And then it just cuts to the next day of him, or that evening, with him sitting next to his dad at dinner. And then just like, no, I want to see the rest of that scene play out. Like, I want to see the teacher come back in and be like, what the hell happened to this classroom?
One of those scenes where he screams, and I feel like if you don't want to see the entirety of this movie, if you can just somehow see that scene where Light screams, it will make you laugh a lot. I mean, it's so Like, there's a part where he's, like, surprised, screaming, and, like, he has pulled his elbows close into his chest and put his hands up in front of, like, his neck. And it just looks, it looks like a elementary school stage play acting. Like, it's terrible. It's terrible. This whole movie's terrible.
It is. And the other scene for me where I was just laughing my ass off is there's a scene where it's where the dad is getting ready to call out Kira on TV, and it's Light and Mia sitting in the bedroom, and they're watching Phantasm on the TV,
yes.
which...
Yeah.
Like, the big thing in that movie is that there's this floating ball with, like, that stabs people in the face. And they show that scene of the floating ball stabbing somebody in the face. And blood starts gushing out of the eyes. And everything else. And then all of a sudden it just goes, breaking news. And cuts to the press conference. And it's just like, what? What reality would a local television station with a big news, like, center be playing Phantasm unedited in the middle of the day?
Oh, man.
Like, just there's no logic there. Like, if you wanted to do, like, a reference or something, because, like, there's a million different ways you could have done that scene. Like, they could have been watching that on the TV and Misa's on the computer and be like, hey, there's some, like, a thing popping up online, you know, or... They could have, like, heard of it. You know, like, again, there was a million different ways you could have done that. Still gotten your Phantasm reference in. And not made that completely stupid. But no, like, you're just like, no, in this reality, we're just gonna throw up this very heavily R-rated movie in the middle of the day and have it be interrupted by news.
Middle of the day. Well, if you talk about little things that bother you about this film, like, my big one was when Elle has come to the belief that Light is Kira, and so he's having him followed, and for whatever reason, Light says, you know what, we need to stop this behavior so they won't suspect me. We need to stop killing people while they're following me. And it's just like, well, no, that, like, what you're doing now is you're actually confirming Elle's suspicions that it's you. All you need to do is pull out your Death Note and write a famous criminal's name down, because guess what? They're not looking for you writing some shit in a notebook. They're not gonna, at that point, the agent that's tailing you is not gonna conclude, he's murdering someone right now. Like, they don't know shit. Why don't you just kill some people? Yeah. And Elle says, oh, whoops, guess I was wrong. And...
yeah, like, it could have just been like, oh, he's just writing his poetry jam, you know? Like,
I just was, like, screaming inside my own head in the middle of the movie, well, throughout the whole movie. But during those parts, I mean, it's just like, this seems like such a simple thing that you would think of when you were writing the script, and particularly with Death Note, and again, not that I want it to be a faithful rendition, but when you were adapting Death Note, like, putting that name on your work is going to draw attention to that sort of stuff, because Death Note is known for thinking, if not being smart, thinking that it is very smart. And, like, this movie doesn't even seem like it believes that it's a smart movie. I don't know. Like, it's really dumb, and again, it just really stands out for Death Note, which, as you well put, a lot of the really great parts of that are Light and Kira battling wits in a way that, at least when I was watching it, like 7 or 8 years ago, I couldn't, like, easily crack open or think, like, oh, I can end around this, or I know exactly how to solve this problem.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it's also just a couple of leaps of logic, because, like, there's a moment where Elle is just like, okay, so he can't kill me directly by visuals alone, so he probably needs my face and my name. And I'm just like, okay, you know, fine, you can probably reach that conclusion from that. But at the same time, if he reached the conclusion that he needs a name, like, why are you giving Wataru's real name to people? Like, why are you giving the real names out of the people that you're working with? You know, like, it just kind of seems like a lot of the stuff that he's just, like, stuff that could have been very preventable.
Did he do that before he knew? Yeah. I can't even remember.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like he did, because, like, I don't think L and Light ever met before that point, and, like, actually, I'm trying to even think of, like, when Light would have been able to have met Wataru. Like, why he knew who that was.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's...
Because he's a master hacker.
It's all...
See, he hacked... No, he didn't hack in. He just used... I guess he just used... because he's... He either stole his dad's password or he, for some reason, has access. Right? They never...
Right.
They never make an issue of that. Like, they never suspect Mr. Turner... Because you'd think, like, that the way he was getting into the database was with his dad's credentials, and you think they'd be like, well, Mr. Turner, it seems like you've been accessing these files right before these people get killed, and it's like, nope, they just... L knows it's Light. He do.
Well, you know, the other thing is that the movie sets it up so that Light isn't the one that killed those FBI agents. It was Misa who killed them, and just like, okay, well then how did Misa get these names? You know, like, yeah, you see her take out the one guard, but like that doesn't explain how she got all those other names.
The guy write down all the names.
Excuse
like
me.
Her convoluted way of killing the first guy was to get him to write down all the names, and he would picture the faces because he worked with them, and he would write down the way in which they would die. And that's the point it really starts to spiral out, because like in the original, only while the note is in Light's possession, he's the only one that can write in it, right? Like it won't do anything for other people.
Well, and see, that was something that I feel like I probably should have done a little bit more research on that, because that was something that was really kind of bugging me too, because it wasn't just necessarily who would be able to use the notebook and for it to work, because like one thing I particularly remember about the original series is that if you touched the Death Note at all, you could see the Death God that it was connected to. Mm-hmm. And in this series, in this movie, for whatever reason, like, that's not the case. Like, it just, like, for whatever, they're just like, the owner of the book can see the Death God. And it's just like, okay, but if that's the case, why is everyone else being able to use the book and not see him?
Yeah.
You know, like, it just, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But from what I remember in the anime, like, there are other people who were able to use it. But at the same time, there were multiple different Death Notes in that series, because again, like, Misa had her own book, and
I forgot about that.
Everything else, and because like another thing that this movie also kind of leaves out is the Shimigami eyes thing, which I'm kind of surprised they left out, quite honestly, because it is this one really interesting thing. Because like, for those who are unfamiliar, the Shimigami eyes is an ability that the Shimigamis have where they can see everyone's names and age and how much time they have left on Earth. And the idea is that a Shimigami could give the eyes to a Death Note user if they gave half of their lifespan away. And like, that's kind of a thing that runs throughout that story, especially when he's going up against L, because he's just like, if you had these eyes, you could see his name and solve this problem a lot quicker. Just, you would have to give up half of your lifespan. And Light being Light, he's like, I want to live as long as I can, so I'm going to figure this out on my own. And, like, it's this really interesting thing, because it's, like, this way out that the characters have at any moment to make things easy. And Misa also has this ability. Like, she gets it very early on. And there's a moment in the movie where, when she introduces herself to Light, he goes, wait, how did you know my name? And I thought, like, oh, okay, so they're playing up the fact that she probably has the eyes already. But that's never brought up in the movie. It's just, like, a weird thing that happens with the dialogue. It's just like, wait, why do you know my name? Like, that could have been, like, a really interesting, like, foreshadowing thing that happened later on, but it doesn't do anything with it. And it just seems like there's nothing really in this entire movie that would lead up to a satisfying conclusion for how one character would be able to beat another character, because it seems like, especially with L in this movie, he knows that Light is Kira. Like, there's no questioning or anything about that. He pretty much knows from the get-go who it is from the start. Like, he just knows, and like, there's no, like, sense of just like, well, I probably had you wrong or pinned you down the wrong way.
No
I
time for
misjudged
that.
you. Like, there's none of that. Yeah, there's no time for that. And it's... especially when that comes up, when L decides to finally confront him, and with him knowing that he needs a face and a name, why did he show his face to Light? Like, just...
I guess he felt so confident in the other half of the puzzle not being cracked.
Yeah, it just... again, but still, you would think that you would be as careful as you could be, especially with a character like Light, or with, like, L. That's another thing I have with this series. I constantly switch up the two names because they begin with the same letter. It's just a thing does. It's just the way my head works.
I did think the actor who played L was one of the few members of that production that was, like, decent at acting. Like, there were a few moments that I thought, okay, like, this is good, and inevitably, like, it would become too much for him. Like, toward the end of the movie, when the L character is very emotional and unstable, I don't think he plays that particularly well at all. But I think some of the moments when he's much more measured, I think they're, like, sort of passable, you know what I mean? Which in this movie seems Oscar worthy amidst, like, the horrible performances that are happening all around.
Yeah, and I actually thought that the guy who was playing the dad, was a pretty decent for the most part, or at least he was doing what he could with that character. And it was, again, like, there are moments in this movie where I kind of feel like some of the actors gave a shit.
That's a great... that should be the opener of the podcast. I kind of feel like some of the actors gave a shit during moments of this. That's not positive at all.
But yeah, it's just like, there's just so many bizarre things with this movie. Like, the soundtrack, like, you mentioned Air Supply at one point.
Yes.
But the song that stuck out to me like a sore thumb was Take My Breath Away during the prom scene, or whatever dance that they went to.
Yeah.
Because, like, I'm sorry, that's the love theme from Trigun. Or, not Trigun, Top Gun.
I wish it was the love theme from Trigun.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
That's the love theme from Top Gun. Like, I'm sorry, like, you either have a shirtless Tom Cruise when that song is playing, or you go away. Like, that's how that song works. You know,
I agree with you. I see what they were going for, and it upsets me. And how, like, just annoying. I mean, you know, what Light wants to do is take the breath out of you by killing you. People are going to die in that scene, and it's supposed to build up the tension. And it's ironic because it's saying take my breath away like I love you, but it really means take my breath away like I'm going to kill you. And I hated myself at that moment.
And again, like, it's just one of those things where I expected shirtless Tom Cruise to just walk his way through the dance floor.
Should have. The movie would be incredible. That would redeem the entire film. We could probably talk for a while about, like, individual moments, but I think like, final thoughts on the film or summary statement of how I feel is I don't think that they executed well on anything. I think they were trying to be I think the movie was trying to be a serious film. They didn't get the horror elements right. They didn't get the romance elements right. The characterization, the thematics fell flat because I didn't care about the characters. The pacing was rushed. Just everything about it felt felt like it would be at home on the CW or even the Sci-Fi Channel. I was very, very disappointed.
Yeah, and the one final thing, because like I mentioned at the beginning that there were two things that I liked about this movie.
Let's end it on a positive.
Right, and well, this may or may not be a positive. We'll see where my argument goes. But the first was William Dafoe, because I'm a big William Dafoe fan. I thought he was great in the movie. And the other one is that I like the twist of Mia basically backstabbing Light. That was a moment where I just like, I didn't even think of that as a possibility of something to happen in this movie. And if you want to improve Misa's character and have her be a bit more independent, I thought that was a really interesting way to go about it, where you put Misa in a position of power over Light. And like, it was one of those things where we're just like, again, like the execution in the actual movie is awful and terrible, and it doesn't really, like, it botches everything that it wants to do. But just the fact that they came up with that idea, like, if that was a scenario that was in the hands of a much better writer, that could have been a really great mid-movie twist, where all of a sudden, instead of Light having to deal with L, now he's having to deal with Misa. And, you know, like, having that conflict of, like, being like, oh, but I love this character, you know, and, you know, I personally don't want to use the Death Note anymore. Like, you can still keep that thing of him trying to get rid of it, and then having this opportunity of this other character who is more than willing to take the mantle, but is unfit for the position. And, like, that's an interesting conflict that you could have done with the movie, but that's not really anything that they did. All it really does is just set up a really stupid and convoluted finale. And it's again, like, it just, I like the fact that they thought a little bit outside of the box in a way to improve Misa's character, because, like, when you look at the source material, one of the biggest problems with it is that Misa is probably one of the worst female characters in Shonen Jump history. Because of just how much she just is, again, that fangirl, and is so subservient to everything that Light does, and you rewrite her in this position where she has power over him. That's great. Like, that's an interesting twist. And it just, I thought the concept of that was good. Just... Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was... When I think about it in that way, it is kind of neat. Like, I think I was thinking about two things, like, more so than the concept. I was thinking about, like, boy, the execution is real stupid. And I was just thinking about, like, how, I don't know, I mean, it was just part of that whole overarching way that I read this movie, which annoyed me, which was just like, this is part of how we're supposed to, like, be sympathetic toward Light, because even when he grabs, like, the ultimate power, you know, the power of a god, like, he's still locked into this, like, oppressive system that's going to prevent him from making real change, because that's just how the world is. Like, and it felt like totally in service of that, rather than, like, necessarily organic. I don't know, nothing about the movie felt organic. Like, and she was just a shitty character that I had no love for as well. Like,
well, I mean, it really says something where at the very beginning of the film, the first thing you see her do is walking away from cheerleading smoking. Like, just,
and I feel like that was just a complete fetish thing.
Yeah, they were like, it's just like,
we want, like, the boy to date, like, the hot cheerleader, and then we never see her cheerlead again. They just want to put her in a cheerleading uniform, or have cheerleaders at the beginning of the movie. And, like, there's a part in this movie where she tells him, I thought you loved your mom, but I guess you don't, because you won't kill your dad.
I forgot about that line. Like, yeah, that line's really bad.
Fuck this.
Yeah. But, But yeah, the Netflix Death Note movie, don't... Okay, here's the one condition that you watch this movie. It has a riff tracks. If it ever has a riff tracks put out along with this movie, watch it with that. Outside of that, man, stay away from this thing. This thing is bad. Like, they're talking about making a sequel.
What?
Yep.
What? No.
Yeah,
No.
that's my thoughts, especially with how you flipping ended that movie. Like, it's just like, where the fuck do you go from there? Like, it just like
they're
that's
going
pretty.
to.
That was
they're
pretty
gonna.
final.
they're gonna cast fucking Nier as. He'll be a villain. They'll just be like, this was a character from the property, this other detective, but we'll make him the bad guy just as a connection point to the material. He'll be the Death Note teenager person.
Yeah,
it won't be.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just. Do not let people think that this deserves a sequel. William Dafoe does not save this movie. It's not very good. Again, if you're able to watch it with a riff tracks like long after this thing has lost its popularity, go for it, but caution, it's not very good. Like, again, like, it's not just that it's a bad adaptation, it's just a bad movie. Like, it is just, again, I don't think it's unwatchable, but it's certainly nothing that deems your time or energy.
No, the entertaining moments are not worth the pain that you have to put up with the rest of the time.
Right. So, let's go ahead and tackle our Patreon question. Our Patreon question this time comes around to Kenshiro Lives 44. And Kenshiro Lives asks, how does the Netflix movies compare to the live-action Japanese films from the mid-2000s? And I'm going to assume you haven't seen them.
I have not.
Okay, so there's 3. I've pretty much only watched the 2.
I've read that there are 4.
There might have been a new... Yeah, because there was the new live-action series, which I also haven't seen, where...
Yeah, Japan has not fallen out of love with Death Note. There are 4 live-action films, a live-action TV series, and I think there's a stage play.
Yeah, well, yeah, if I remember correctly, there's also a stage musical. But, which...
A musical? Yeah. That's incredible.
But,
you get, like, that would be... To see them... If they reenact the chip scene, like, shot for shot, that would be incredible.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the other thing that this movie fails to do. The live-action Netflix Death Note movie, there's no chip scene. So,
motherfucker. How can you leave out the chip scene?
I mean, just, they don't value memes. Netflix does not value our memes. But anyway, to get back to the question. So, I pretty much have seen... I've known of the 3 main ones for the longest time. I've forgotten that there was a 4th. You basically had the 2 main movies, and then you had, like, a 3rd... Basically just a L movie, being L, solving a completely unrelated case to everything else, which I don't think it's based off of the light novel about L. Yeah, and I've read the light novel too. I think my sister has it still. But actually the light novel was a pretty good read because it was about L meeting up with a character whose name I have forgotten, who was in the series momentarily, who was the fiance of the first FBI director that Light kills in the series, who is like the second biggest threat. It's like them teaming up to find a serial killer. Like, it's a pretty good book. But when it comes to those 2 movies, they're not very good, and it comes down to really 2 things. One, it has a very rushed pace. It has that same problem where it's trying to tackle way too much and trying to cover every single little thing that happens in the book or in the series. And so you kind of have to deal with that. And the other biggest problem is that it was clear that the movie was made by people who are fans of L and not the series itself. Because like, my biggest problem with those films is that they, like, to kind of spoil them, they basically completely change the ending so that L wins in the end. and captures Light and is the winner of the series. And that, for me, is just like, well, that completely ruins the main progression that's in the series, which is about Light becoming a monster and whatnot. Like, it's more... Like, it's one of those things where it kind of forgets the fact that as much as a terrible person that Light is, he's still the protagonist of this story. He is the person that we're supposed to follow. L is the antagonist, even though he is the quote-unquote good guy of this story. Like, again, he is the main antagonistic force of this character. So, like, I'm not saying to have stories where the antagonist wins is a bad thing, but when you have the antagonist win for the sake of fan service and for the sake of just because you're unhappy with how the main things go, it seems like fan fiction to me in particular. Like, that's how I see a lot of those movies. But here's the thing, it's still a hell of a lot better than the Netflix films.
Not a high bar to clear.
Yeah, because at least with, like, the Japanese films, like, it was clear that it was made by someone who watched the series and liked it, but felt like they could do it better, you know? And with this, it just kind of seems like a very, with the Netflix film, it just kind of seems like a cynical bigwig in Hollywood being just like, oh, here's this property that the kids like, we'll go ahead and make a film of this. Hey, let's just read the Wikipedia.
Interns. Hey, interns. Come here. Did you like Death Note? Yeah, I remember we watched it like a few years ago. I kind of remember what happened. Well, make this movie for me.
But yeah, so like that's kind of my thoughts on comparison between those two films. Yeah, the Japanese ones are way better, but that's not saying a lot. So, again, thank you very much for the question. Kenshiro Lives.
Thank you.
44. Very much. And if you want to send a question to the podcast, go ahead and hit up our Patreon. It's $1 to get in. More for other bits and bools and whatnot, because like we have even an additional podcast that we've been having going on with the site about the DBZ movies, and that's a Patreon exclusive.
Yep. That is the bonus tier. The $5 tier, you get access to those podcasts. And then the higher tiers are for donating and getting input on translations.
Yes, so basically those are like the big three things that we have going on. Entry doorway, $1, you get the question to the show that we read off and then we talk about. And then $5 for the pods about DBZ movies. And then $10 is our translations. At the end of the show, we'd like to go ahead and take a moment to thank the $10 backers on our Patreon. So at this moment, we'd like to give a special shout out to Aname, Osama_A, Cornelia Natsidi, Chris Magnifito, and Ben Grant. Again, thank you very much for your donation. It means a lot to us and it helps us keep the site going. Again, thank you very much. And speaking of which, you can also go ahead and head up to our site, wavemotioncanon.com, and we've got a couple of things up on there. In terms of our most recent translations, we have an interview with the director of the latest Lupin III film, The Blood Spray of Ichikawa Goramon, which is like completely new, coming out in March 2017. We've got that up on the site right now.
Redline's own Takeshi Koike.
Right. So go ahead and check that out. That's a pretty interesting read. We've also got two brand spanking new articles up. One was written by a person that's on the show, and it's titled The Most Important Episode for Lapsed Dragon Ball Fans. You want to talk about that one for a little bit?
Sure. So I wrote this piece right after I watched episode 84 of Dragon Ball Super. I am a little bit behind, obviously. The show, I think 105 just aired this weekend, and I'm about 15 episodes behind. But right after I saw 84, I thought that, wow, this show is addressing what I felt like were a couple of the biggest issues that might have turned fans away from DBZ. And I talk about what those issues are, and I talk about how this episode of Dragon Ball Super kind of seems to portend good things for the series and say, like, well, we're aware of this and we are fixing it and we're going in a direction where those things won't be an issue.
Awesome. Again, you can go ahead and check that out on wavemotioncanon.com. That's where we're putting up all of our articles for just random think pieces and for the translations that we have going up. And again, like, if you want to help out, go ahead and head over to our Patreon at Wave Motion Canon. And again, every little bit helps, especially right now, because a lot of these go to translations, keeping up with the back end of the site and everything else. So again, thank you very much for donations and everything else.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And so that's going to bring us to the end of our show. Where can they find you on the internet, Subs?
So if you want to hit me up, I'm at The Subtle Doctor on Twitter. I respond to basically anyone who @s me wants to talk about anime, music, politics, hip-hop, sports, whatever. And if you want to ask me a question that can't fit in a single tweet, or you want me to answer something more than 140 characters, I have a Curious Cat, curiouscat.me/thesubtledoctor, and we do long form responses there. I have another podcast that I help produce and host. It's called Warui Desho, WARUI DESHOU. If you search for that on iTunes or SoundCloud or the WordPress blog, you can find us there and find our shows. Our latest episode just went up today. In fact, it's a in-depth look at spring 2017 3D CG anime, a sci-fi show called Kato: The Right Answer.
Awesome. And for myself, you can find me at CJ Hitchcock at Twitter. And that's pretty much it for me. I mean, you can come and say hi. I respond sometimes, for the most part. I try.
It's true, he
I'm
does.
not as active as I used to be. I'm friendly, I swear. I don't know if I am willing to talk about politics all that much, or sports. I mean, like, if you want to talk about snooker. Snooker's pretty awesome.
You hate sports, though.
But, well, again, I like snooker, and I'm thinking of getting back into swimming. But yeah, and so CJ Hitchcock on Twitter, and go ahead and follow us on YouTube's too, on Wave Motion Canon on YouTube, and we're also on your podcatchers on iTunes for the weekly anime podcast. That is WMC.
And follow the site on Twitter at Wave Motion Blog, and you'll be updated when things come out.
Yes, and I hear if you follow every single member on the site, you might get a gold star. Maybe.
Is that when the Death God comes to visit you with a notebook?
We'll have to see if it's in the budget. All right. So thank you again so much for listening. We'll go ahead and see you guys next week. And in the meantime, go ahead and watch the original Death Note series or read the manga. It's really good. This Netflix movie is garbage. Ignore it. Have a good week.
Take care, guys.